What a way to start out.
It's okay. So welcome to our first inaugural Central Atlantic Division Tiffany Circle happy hour. So we'll say, I hope you have your drink of choice. I'm Jeannie Curtis, and I am a senior philanthropy officer with the Red Cross, and I am also your division Tiffany Circle lead. And we are so excited to see you. We have, Kendra, we have 90 registered today. So, wow. Which is the first ever. So we're so thrilled that you are here. So as we get ready to listen to Beth Renner, and I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Flynn to introduce Beth. And Kathy is our Tiffany Circle National Council co-chair. We're going to put everybody on mute. So enjoy and sit back and listen to Beth.
All right. I'm going to start with a couple of welcomes. Hey, Beth.
I don't know, somebody from Mid-Atlantic.
Okay. All right, can you hear me? So, got my notes interrupted. You're on mute. I want to ask you to use the chat to submit your questions in order to keep to the time that we have. We'll not be taking questions from the floor. So I want to say that I'm excited to be the COVID co-chair of the National Council this year. And Jan Tretnick, my co-chair, is also joined us this evening, but we're hoping that she won't be a COVID co-chair by the time she's done. The Tiffany Circle is very busy this year, the National Council, in representing you and leading you with our Tiffany Circle support of the American Red Cross. We have 10 new National Council members out of 30 voting members to the National Council, and they're going to help lead us into the Tiffany Circle future. We have a new 3-year strategic plan to further our growth, our influence, our volunteer efforts, and to expand women's philanthropy, easy for me to say, with the American Red Cross to be more diverse and inclusive. I'd like to make a couple of introductions. Mandy Peoples is on with us this evening. She's our director, our national director of Women in Philanthropy. And we have 4 National Council members in the Central Atlantic Division. In addition to me, I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and the Central and South Ohio region. And we have Tammy Moore from the National Capital and Greater Chesapeake region. Tammy is going to be one of our 3 2021 Summit co-chairs. So yes, in some fashion, we will be having a summit next year between October 7th and 10th. Tammy is also an advisor to the American Red Cross Services to the Armed Forces. Also from the National Capital and Greater Chesapeake region is Dale Kopechnik. Dale is a past chair of her Tiffany Circle, and she is a division volunteer lead with the National Council for Central Atlantic. And our newest National Council member from Central Atlantic is Pam State. Pam is from Kentucky, where she serves on the steering committee, and she is also one of our 3 Summit co-chairs for 2021. With that, I would like to introduce the speaker, Beth Renner. Beth has 29 years of experience in the financial services industry. She is the National Director for the Wells Fargo Philanthropic Services, leading 110 philanthropic specialists and $26 billion in philanthropic endowments, foundations, trusts, and funds. Beth is highly credentialed and a sought-after expert on philanthropic giving with a particular affection for women's giving. The past 2 years, it's been my privilege to serve as Beth's chair-elect. And I can tell you, Beth has a marvelous sense of humor, a passionate heart, and she's a dear friend. So Beth, as your role as Wells Fargo National Director of Philanthropic Services and your extensive volunteer work with the American Red Cross, that means that you are uniquely plugged into trends in philanthropy. Can you share with us some giving trends specifically with women, and what are the general trends and how have they changed with COVID-19?
Yeah. So, hey, thanks, Kathy. And before I kind of represent kind of that answer that question, I should say, I do want to say this. It's so good to be with all of you, even if it's virtually. And just thank you for being Tiffany Circle members. Today, I come to you first as a Tiffany Circle member myself, and then secondly, as a Wells Fargo National Director, Philanthropic Services, all that stuff, right? I'm excited to kind of share with you some of the things and trends that we're seeing. It has been an historic year in many cases, as we've all experienced. And from a national perspective, there's really a couple of things that are happening in the nonprofit sector that I just think it's really important to share with you, and then also how that relates to women in giving. So when the pandemic hit, we were all stunned by it, to say the least, and a lot of organizations were pivoting their workforce to a mobile environment. Nonprofits had to do that as well. And what we saw is nonprofits are used to dealing with crisis and disasters. Many of their missions are focused on those items. And so they're used to kind of the three stages of response. And so we saw nonprofits going through that first kind of response phase of what are the initial needs? What do I need to do to keep the organization going? We saw then that they moved further into the recovery phase and understanding what new and emerging needs were happening to that organization. And then the third phase is that I think that that will be in years and months to come, is this idea of creating resiliency. And so the response, the recovery, and the resiliency phase. And the resiliency phase is really how is that organization forever changed as a result of the pandemic, and what are kind of the new and emerging needs that are going to happen. I'll share with you how I think that the Red Cross has went through those stages in themselves already in trying to adapt to this new environment. There's three themes that emerged as a result of the pandemic, and none of this is new news, but it's really being intentional about calling it out. And we saw the themes around the healthcare issues, right, that this pandemic is creating or highlighting. Also the educational challenges that we are having of students being in virtual environments and maybe not having access to technology. So education is the second theme. And then the third theme is around the social and racial justice issues that were being highlighted, not only as a result of the pandemic, but obviously as a result of George Floyd's death and Breonna Taylor's, and all of those names that go before them. And so a lot of dialogue in philanthropy is happening around those three themes with nonprofits and with donors of how can they make a greater impact and help create that change. What's interesting, we've been really tracking closely what the giving looks like. National Philanthropic Trust, who's our national donor advised fund provider, early on said that they are experiencing the busiest grant-making quarter in the first quarter during that initial stage of the pandemic than ever before. So those funds that are being held in charitable assets are being distributed out to these organizations. And so we're seeing that philanthropists are stepping up to the plate as some of those first responders. What's also interesting is that there are a number of surveys that are currently going on, whether it's with Gallup or Indiana University. The Women's Philanthropy Institute did a recent survey, and what they're starting to see is that there's some disparities in how women are being impacted as a result of the pandemic. And in particular, we all know this, we're having to wear many hats. Maybe we are the school teacher for part of our day. Maybe we are in our professional job for part of our day. And then maybe we are the general caretaker as well. We're seeing also that women have disproportionately held many of the positions that are at risk, whether they are healthcare providers. I think it is the statistic that shows is that there were 72% of healthcare providers were women, and therefore they are more greatly at risk. Also taking a look at a greater population of service providers, and we know that they were impacted by that as well. And so we also know that domestic abuse has increased, unfortunately, during this time frame, when women are locked down in these households, when we are told to quarantine or to stay shelter in place. And so it's been very challenging for women as a whole. What we do know that is still the case is when a household makes the decision to give to organizations, charities, that women are the majority of the decision maker. So they are the ones that steward those dollars most often in their households. And so I do believe that women are going to continue to play a really important role in how philanthropy is going to be funded in the future, albeit there is a great deal of concern of how this pandemic could be negatively impacting women as a general population. So that's just kind of some of the nuggets that I see, Kathy, that are going on with some of the trends that are happening.
Great. So off script here. So can you tell us more about some of the ways in which the Red Cross in particular is, from your experience as the National Council Chair and a Tiffany Circle member, how are the Tiffany Circle and the Red Cross with the fundamental principles addressing the pandemic and the current trends that you mentioned?
Yeah, so a couple questions stacked in there for me, Kathy. So like I said at the beginning, we were really watching how nonprofits were going to respond to the pandemic and this idea of how to make their workforce more mobile. One of the benefits of the Red Cross is that they are already very adept at mobilizing volunteers because the majority of their workforce is in that volunteer capacity. So for them, it maybe wasn't as much of an issue of how do you mobilize your workforce, but maybe how do you adapt your mission to this new environment. And so some of the things that we saw that the Red Cross was doing was really around a couple of things: the blood supply, right? How do you have blood drives when there is a concern about COVID and the pandemic itself? And so we knew that the need was still there around the providing 40% of the nation's blood supply itself. And so you saw them adapt to new and different ways, whether it's social distancing or providing more protective environments for those donors, making appointments. I know that here in my community, they were really intentional about making the appointments so that people felt comfortable that there wouldn't be any clusters of people that are adapting to it. You know, the other thing that they adapted to is the sheltering piece of it. And I know, Patty, you sent me some data on just recently of how we've adapted the sheltering to now hotel stays instead of having these large grouping of individuals that are staying in shelters during national disasters. And I want to say, and I'm gonna maybe get it wrong, but Patty, you can help me out. Over 200,000. Or actually it was 20,000 last night alone, individuals were in hotels versus in shelters. And I think it was, Kathy, was it 800,000 through the pandemic already?
Yep. Yeah, 810
okay.
overnight stays.
So 810,000 people were in hotels versus in those shelters. So the hard part of all of this, right, is a lot of the things that I talked about is increased costs to the Red Cross. And so that is something that they're going to have to adapt and making sure that they're addressing that piece of it itself. I thought one of the most creative parts that I heard that they were engaging in was this idea around virtual client assistance. And so they invested in some new technology so that they can, instead of face-to-face meetings with clients during disasters, or that they can do it virtually, just like what we're doing today. And so I really think that you're going to continue to see not only the Red Cross, but others kind of adapt to this new environment. I thought the other part that was really interesting is on the feeding piece of it is making sure that the meals are kind of prepackaged before they distribute to them to the individual clients in the hotel rooms. So a lot of different things that nonprofits, in particular the Red Cross, is doing to try and address these issues.
Wow, you've certainly given us a lot to think about. So,
You know, Kathy, one of the things that I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned, you know, when you talk about that financial need aspect of things is that, you know, I've had a lot of dialogue with donors now as a result of the pandemic of wanting to make their investment work harder for them. And oftentimes they talk about this idea, I give to this organization, I give to this organization, but now what do I do when the need is so great? And what we try to do is help guide them on this idea of, just like we have a kind of a financial portfolio where we invest in different stocks, we encourage donors to take a look at their philanthropic investments in the same way, in the sense that maybe they are investing in a value stock or maybe a growth stock, but taking it into consideration of how do I want to adjust my allocation as a result of the pandemic. We are definitely seeing more donors that are reallocating their funds to kind of basic human need services. And so I do believe that that will emerge out of this pandemic as well, and that the Red Cross will continue to benefit from it from that standpoint. But, you know, Kathy, I wanted to ask one question back to you, and it was really kind of internationally. I know that you're very involved internationally with the Red Cross. You've traveled to Malawi. You've been an independent monitor for measles and rubella. I think that's been awesome. Can you just share with me, and maybe for the group as well, some of the things that you have learned that the Red Cross is doing internationally?
sure, I would be glad to do that. I'm going to talk about two areas in particular. And the American Red Cross sometimes works on their own internationally, but often in partnership with the IFRC, which is the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. And so our work with the IFRC is we are continuing to do our work with vaccine preventable diseases. And that most frequently is our own American Red Cross involvement with the Measles and Rubella Initiative. COVID, in fact, may cause a disruption to routine immunizations for as many as 80 million children under the age of 1. And if these children aren't going to get their routine immunizations, the models indicate those could result in more deaths from the lack of vaccine preventable diseases than from COVID itself. And our American Red Cross has Maria Ghosh on our international services team, and she is serving as a co-chair with the International Red Cross and Red Crescent Operational Strategic Work Group on immunizations. And the second area that I wanted to mention was that with our partnership and the IFRC, we are participating with Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, the World Health Organization, and the UN to ensure an equitable and fair access to immunizations and bring visibility to the COVAX facility, which is 160 countries to date who have signed on to support equitable access and distribution for a future COVID-19 vaccine. So with that, I wanted to give you a reminder that if you have questions, to please put them in the chat, and we will try to answer them while we're continuing with our program this evening. And with that, I would like to turn the program back over to Jeannie Curtis from our Kentucky region. Jeannie, in addition to being one of the kindest, most giving and gracious women I know, and I'm proud to call her my friend, is a senior philanthropy officer. She's our division Tiffany Circle director, and on the National Council, she is our division staff liaison. So Jeannie, I'll pass it over to you.
Well, thank you. I just want all the ladies to know, you know how hard you work when you have a dinner party or you're putting on a program, and we have timed this mercilessly down to the last minute. And we have given our speaker, Beth, strong words to keep her comment short. And she not only shrunk them down, we were expecting her to give us till probably 5:30, 5:35 of her wonderful words of wisdom. So because it is now 5:22, we do have time for some questions. And I saw one in the chat. So if you want to raise your hand and speak out and ask a question. So Beth, could you elaborate on the question that you answered in the chat on donor fatigue?
Absolutely. So the question was, am I concerned that we'll see donor fatigue as a result of the pandemic as it goes on? And what we're initially seeing is more of a reallocation of dollars. And so think of it in, so what we saw in 2008 during the recession is that more dollars, there was actually the kind of the leveling off of giving. It didn't decrease dramatically, but what happened is that different sectors received different proportions. So the arts and culture organizations typically suffer during economic downturns, and more dollars are allocated to kind of basic human needs. So think of the food banks, and think of women's shelters and things of that nature. And so I believe that you're going to see kind of that reallocation or redistribution of dollars happen today. I absolutely believe that there's going to be more that's going to be dedicated to healthcare. I absolutely already see that there are dollars going into social justice issues and also educational issues themselves. So I think that I don't believe we're initially seeing that donor fatigue. If anything, what they're trying to figure out is how do they make their donor dollar go further and create more impact from that standpoint. But like I said, none of us here today have lived through a pandemic. This is the first one of our generation. And it will be interesting to kind of see how things progress through it. But I know that there are three sectors in our economy: the for-profit, the nonprofit, and philanthropy. And all three of them are going to have to work at this to resolve these issues.
Thank you. I think I saw another question in the chat.
Yeah, so there's so many requests from all different philanthropic organizations. How do you see people prioritize these requests? There are only so many dollars available. I will tell you, as our philanthropic advisors, that is the most often discussed issue with our clients is, how do I feel like I am becoming more organized in my giving? And here's how I would say it. It's very simple. What we do is that I would encourage you to just start from a place of, what do you want your philanthropy to be represented of your values? So how do you want your values to be represented in your philanthropy? Then say, okay, I know what my values are. I want them to be represented this way of an area of funding. So identify that area of funding. And then what you do is say, okay, all these requests that come in, do they align with my values? Are they matched up with my areas of funding? And if they are, that's a green light, right? And if they aren't, maybe it's that disposable philanthropy, that disposable income that you want, or dollars that you want to, or discretionary dollars that you want to set aside, is to still say, allowing yourself to say yes. But we oftentimes use the phrase, when you're organized in your giving around your values and being intentional about your philanthropy, it allows you to say no to someone, but a larger yes to others. And we've oftentimes found that creates a greater sense of donor satisfaction. And so that's how I would answer that, is trying to be really intentional about developing a giving plan for yourself.
Karen, I see you've just asked one. So set up personal philanthropy. Do you want to put voice to that?
Yeah, that's I want to hear that. That's awesome. Karen, share that with us. Or maybe that's a question. There's a question mark after it.
It was really a question to your statement. Are you suggesting that with our personal philanthropy that we structure it almost like a company where they have pillars of interest? We have these 3 or 4 pillars, and these are the things that are going to be our main focus. And then, yes, if there's a little money left over, we'll give it here and there. but small gifts, but our larger gifts will go to these particular focus areas.
Absolutely, because who doesn't hate sitting and being asked by someone for a gift and having to say no? You just don't, you feel uncomfortable with it. But it allows you to redirect the conversation with more purpose of saying, you know, I really appreciate you asking me about that. Here's my 3 areas of focus with my philanthropy. These are going to be where you're going to see me support them the most. But if you'd like to give me the information, I may consider it if I have dollars left over. And so it allows you to feel really more empowered about it, but also getting kind of that word out about what are the causes that you do care about the most. So yeah, great.
So did I see someone had their hand up?
Yes, this is Kathy Coleman,
Kathy,
and I
there
had
you
my
are.
hand
Yeah.
up. And Beth, you may have answered this in a different way, but I'm seeing a trend in a lot of my friends giving to, let's say, the food bank. When I've gone to them for other requests, they've said, well, we've given to the food bank because there's the greatest need. Does the Red Cross collaborate with places like the food bank and other institutions so that we're not duplicating efforts?
That's a great question, Kathy. So Jeannie, can you answer that one?
Yes, I can. And we have other gift officers, so please chime in as well. Karen, Patty, we work with partners, and our partners include everyone from food banks to Salvation Army to the Baptists go in disasters, and we partner with them as well. So our primary mission is to help those in need, and from what those needs are, that's how we partner. So Patty and Karen, would you all like to give a better answer?
Jeannie, really in terms of the needs, one of the things that we're also seeing is that on these larger disasters, the Red Cross has the viability to respond on these larger disasters, and several non-government organizations that we typically would partner with are not able to be there. So it puts more of a burden on the Red Cross on larger disasters because they don't have that financial footing like the Red Cross does. But we do partner with, like you said, the Southern Baptist. We partner with World Kitchen. Locally, you can have partnerships in different chapters. We'll partner with helping to distribute school lunches, depending upon where that region, that chapter is. Other chapters also will help and partner with Goodwill. One of the neat things with Goodwill is that the Red Cross on our shelters will accept clothing donations, and then we in turn give it over to the Goodwill. They clean it, wash it, bring it back, and Goodwill distributes it at Red Cross shelters because clothing isn't something the Red Cross does, but it's a great partnership for an example.
So Kathy, where are you from? We'll hear our introductions in a minute, but where are you from?
Sure, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio.
You have a wonderful chapter there with Donna Grayson as your staff person and Michelle Palinko. So I think in each one of our chapters, as Patty was saying, that we all may do the same thing, but we may have other partners and other opportunities. So I would check with them.
Well, I love the collaboration of what the three individuals have already said about how the American Red Cross partners. And I'm particularly interested in the Goodwill and people donating clothing, because let's face it, we all have tons of clothing. I've been cleaning out my closet to no avail from clothing to kitchen things, one thing and another, and donating them. But I love the partnership and I love the collaboration. So thank you, everyone.
We have one more question in the chat and then we'll go into introductions. So
should I read it?
Sure.
So there's a saying that if you teach a man to fish, he can feed himself. If you teach a woman to fish, you feed a community. Okay. What are some great philanthropic efforts that are happening where women are playing a key leadership position to drive sustainable change? So here, what I will tell you is that there is a lot of work to be done. So this was I think it was in the fourth quarter of last year. Again, a great resource that I tap into is the Women's Philanthropy Institute at Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. They did a study in the fourth quarter of last year, and I think they released the results in March. And what some of the information was is that while we, as women, are making the philanthropic decision, the vast majority of those assets are not being allocated to women empowerment organizations. So we are making decisions, but the nonprofits that are out there that are focused on empowering women are not as many. I wanted to say it was like only 15% of nonprofits out there receive funding that are empowering women. That, folks, is way, way too low. I think that that's a challenge. I think also you're going to see, and I talked to the Women's Philanthropy Institute 2 weeks ago, and they are going to release their second layer of study in the fourth quarter of this year that is going to show the disparate impact that women are feeling as a result of the pandemic economically. There was an article that I saw fly by my computer screen today about how some of the things that are happening as a result of the pandemic are setting women backwards, not only economically, educationally, as well as vocationally. And so I think that there is going to be a lot of challenges for us ahead in trying to overcome some of those issues. I know large corporations, there's a lack of tolerance that is increasing, not only around diversity in large corporations, but not only racial diversity, but gender diversity. Our organization is grappling with that right now in making sure that we are doing what we need to do to advance equality for everyone. So I absolutely believe that you're going to continue to see that emerge as a challenge for us and things that need to be addressed going forward. Great, great question. Tough question, but that's a good one.
Okay, why don't we do, we're going to